So Haney asked me to give a talk about Sepsis 3.0, and this is a really broad topic, so I thought we really need to narrow this down. Let's go over what is it and should we be using it. So I have absolutely nothing to disclose other than I am very much a antagonist to CMS. We're going to review the Sepsis 3.0 literature. We're going to talk about how do we then apply that at the bedside. So if we go through the whole evolution of SIRS, it started about 1992 when a consensus paper came out, and it kind of stayed with us until about 2015. And I know we have different levels of learners up here. So these are the SIRS criteria that we have all been practicing with, and most of our major sepsis studies were using these criteria. Then in 2015, this paper came out in the New England Journal. And what the investigators did here was they looked at 172 ICUs in Australia and New Zealand. And what they did was they looked at the patients that they knew for a fact had severe sepsis and end organ dysfunction. And they said, let's look and see which one of these individuals have SIRS positive sepsis, which was 2 or more SIRS criteria, versus the ones who have SIRS negative, less than 2. And they had some good numbers. They had about 96,000 SIRS positive and about 13,000 SIRS negative. And very sadly, they found that 1 in 8 of these patients would have been missed based on SIRS criteria, although all the patients were captured because they were in the ICU getting treated for severe sepsis and end organ dysfunction. The other thing they found out was that if you were SIRS positive, there's a 26% increase in your risk of mortality. And they also found that for each jump in SIRS criteria, there was a 13% linear increase in mortality as well. So this was the breakthrough paper that people used to say SIRS criteria, they're not good enough, we shouldn't be using them. Although if you look at the data, I don't know that you can hang your hat on that. So after that paper, this bomb got dropped on us in 2016, and this was Sepsis 3.0. And so what these guys did, this is the Venn diagram that came out in 1992 with the original paper, and we have our infection overlapping with SIRS, and then your breakdown of the different degrees of sepsis spectral illnesses. Well, the Sepsis 3.0 people came in and they did like a ninja kick and got rid of SIRS, and they put in Q-SOFA. Then they were like, forget this severe sepsis stuff, it's gone. And they just got rid of it. So what's Q-SOFA? These are your Q-SOFA. If you have 2 out of 3 of these, your patient is considered Q-SOFA positive. So altered mental status, increased respiratory rate, or hypotension. So just a quick show of hands here. Before Sepsis 3.0 came out, for all the individuals practicing in this room, if your patient had 2 out of 3 of these, did you think there was going to be a high chance that they would die? Just show of hands. Who had a high degree of suspicion that their patient would be dead if they had 2 out of 3 of these? All right, just checking. So what about septic shock? I actually really like the septic shock definition. It's a MAP less than 65 plus a lactate greater than 2 after that, after this stuff. You give the fluids, you do your resuscitation, and now they still have a MAP less than 65, and they have a lactate elevated greater than 2. I think that's fair. The one thing, though, in the paper that they were very, very clear to stress was this is not a management trigger. Do not use this to guide your management. In fact, on page 807, they said that Sepsis 3.0 is simply for risk stratification. Do not use the Q-SOFA criteria to trigger management. Also on page 807, there's a little chart that is down in the bottom left-hand corner that gives you the Q-SOFA criteria, and it gives that as a definition for sepsis. So a little bit confusing on if this isn't something that we're supposed to use for clinical management, then why are you using it as a definition, which then triggers clinical management? So what happens if we take our SIRS and our Q-SOFA and we put them together? We compare them head to head. I did a very, very intensive literature search We don't have a librarian at Aria Jefferson, and I think literature searches are the bane of my existence. So I use Google Scholar a lot. And I found 8 really good articles, and they were mixed populations. Some of the patients were ER, some were ICU, and then some of them were people who were on the floors and then were upgraded to the unit, and some of them started in the ED and ended in the unit. And so what we found was most of the outcomes were the primary outcomes were in-hospital mortality. And then other things that they looked at were, hemodialysis, intubation, length of stay. Now, I am not a statistician. I did not do any heterogeneity analyses of these different studies. But what I did do was something that my 4-year-old could do. I lined up numbers on both sides, and I looked at the sensitivities. And if you look at the sensitivity of SIRS in detecting patients who are septic, it wins. I mean, it just has higher sensitivity. Again, those of you who love stats, we can talk later and you can tell me if this is meaningful or not. But to me, it just seemed kind of obvious, so I went with it. 3 of the studies looked at Q-SOFA to see how it would be as an early warning marker. So can we use this score as an early warning score for our septic patients? And what they did was they looked at all of the patients and then they measured the percentage of those patients who were SIRS positive at time of enrollment versus were Q-SOFA positive at time of enrollment. And you can see here that the majority of the patients fell under the SIRS positive criteria compared to Q-SOFA at the time of enrollment in the study. One study actually found out that less than 1 in 5 patients met Q-SOFA at time of infection or enrollment into their study. Also, if you looked at the patients who were SIRS positive, they were SIRS positive about 17 hours prior to infection or enrollment to the study, as opposed to the Q-SOFA, where they were 5 hours. So now let's go to specificity. Hands down, Q-SOFA won, although some of those numbers are kind of sad too, I think, in general. But it beats out SIRS, there's no question. So if we're looking at the area under the curve for mortality, forget all the data. Let's just go by raising of the hands. Which one do you think is a better predictor of mortality, SIRS or the Q-SOFA? Q-SOFA. So Q-SOFA wins the area under the curve for mortality, and we know that. But SIRS wins for sensitivity. So if you want to catch something, you're going to use a test with a high sensitivity, SIRS is your winner. If you want to know for a fact that they really do have sepsis and they might die, Q-SOFA. So what does this mean at the bedside? Well, I work in the emergency department. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I want to catch as many patients as I can who are coming in with this disease state. I don't want to miss anybody. So for me, SIRS is the winner. Like, hands down, I'm going to use SIRS in the emergency department. However, I don't think Q-SOFA is completely worthless. I think that if you have a patient with 2 out of 3 of these, you know that there's a higher chance they're going to be this. So I think what you need to do is then be very aggressive in your resuscitation. Get your antibiotics in right away. Don't mess around. Just get them in. Start with your fluid resuscitation. Then have a very, very low threshold to send them to the intensive care unit, because this is where those patients need to be. So should we be using Sepsis 3.0? That was our second question. We did the what is it. Now should we be using it? And I'm going to tell you, Q-SOFA is not sensitive enough to be used for what we need it for. It is not a good screening tool. It is not a good early warning score or marker to be used. For septic shock, I like this. I think this is very reasonable. I think there's a lot of data that supported this. I think there's not a lot of area for gray. You gave your fluids. They're not really better. They still have end organ markers that are concerning. So let's press forward and let's go down this with septic shock. The only problem about all of this is that the CMS devil is guiding what the definitions are right now. And I did say that I was totally biased. That was in my disclosures. So whether you like Q-SOFA or you like SIRS, CMS uses SIRS. That's what we're going to be using. I'm not even going to get into the lactate levels because my head will explode and we don't have that much time. But I am happy to take any questions.